This week on the Brody File, the debate over gay marriage heats up. We go in depth to discuss the ramifications from a faith-based perspective. Tony Perkins and Bishop Harry Jackson are here to discuss.
People know that this is not just about two people who love each other. This is about radically altering America and the moral culture in our country.
We'll also hear from the progressive side as a pastor who agrees with same-sex marriage joins us in studio.
If you have a more literalist reading of the scriptures, that it does not condemn homosexuality in the way in which many preachers, conservative preachers, say that it does.
Plus, statistical analysis on this hot-button issue.
We're seeing actually quite a sea change in the general population that really is being led by the younger generation.
This subject is toxic, but the Brody File is ready to delve in. It's all next. And welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Brody File. It is our 80th show, so a big happy birthday to us. We plan to celebrate at Chuck E. Cheese, but not before tackling the very heated and contentious issue of gay marriage. We have a panel of guests on both sides of the issue, but look, let's face it, we probably wouldn't even be devoting a whole 30-minute show to this subject if it weren't for these historic comments by the President of the United States.
Over the course of several years, as I talk to friends and family and neighbors, when I think about members of my own staff who are in incredibly committed monogamous relationships, same-sex relationships, who are raising kids together, when I think about those soldiers or airmen or Marines or sailors who are out there fighting on my behalf and yet feel constrained, even now that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is gone, because they're not able to commit themselves in a marriage. At a certain point, I've just concluded that for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
All right, before we get going here, the Brody File has cranked up our high-tech map machine to show you all the states that support traditional marriage. Now, we want you to look at the states in dark red. These are the states where they are for traditional marriage, and they're also against civil unions. The states in this regular red color are the ones that have a law on the books supporting traditional marriage, but they haven't forbid civil unions, at least not yet. You need to memorize the map. There's going to be a quiz at the end of the show. No, there won't be a quiz. All right, now let's get to our guests. Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council and Bishop Harry Jackson have been at the forefront of this fight for what seems like forever. I recently sat down with both of them to discuss this very sensitive but crucial issue in America. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here. Appreciate it. Let me ask Bishop Jackson, let me start with you. Tony, I'm curious to get your take on this too. When President Obama made that announcement that was broken into on national television by ABC News, which I thought was interesting in and of itself, what was your reaction right then? How did you hear about what was going on? Where were you? I'm sure you kind of can recall what was going on because the media made this such a big deal. I'm wondering about that. What were your reactions right then?
Well, I was listening to a radio program in which the Maryland coordinator for our marriage amendment process, Derek McCoy, was on the air talking, and he was asked the question, well, what if President Obama comes out in favor of same-sex marriage? The news hadn't broken yet, but there was obviously an idea around certain camps that it was going to happen. Therefore, when it did happen, and the president talked about his evolving, I thought it was a cheap trick, politically speaking. If you read his earlier books, you would have known that he always was in Jeremiah Wright's church, which had done same-sex marriage or same-sex committal services for nearly 20 years. You would have known that. You would have known he was for it originally. And so I had to think it's premeditated, And it's a slap in the face of African American clergymen. Once again, the Democratic Party, who's really pushing this whole issue aggressively, has thrown the black community under the bus. I like to say it's like we're in an adulterous relationship with them, in which they knock on the door at midnight, they want what they want, but they don't give us flowers, there's no romance. We're just purely used by that group. And I think there'll be a backlash.
Tony, what was your reaction when you saw the president and you saw all this national television breaking news? There was George Stephanopoulos in the whole 9 yards.
Well, it's certainly not going to be one of those events that rises to the occasion of, do you remember where you were when JFK was shot, or the Challenger exploded, or, you know, but I do think historically we'll look back on this as a turning point in where I think the President of the United States broke trust with the American people. Because what you have is the day before this, you had a vote out of North Carolina, the 32nd state to vote on marriage. 61% of the people saying marriage should be as it's always been, and it should be the union of a man and a woman. The president, right on the heels of that, comes out and proclaims he's okay with same-sex marriage, not citing any evidence other than what his daughters or his wife or his neighbors, and I'm still trying to figure out which neighbor he leaned over the fence and talked to. But this is, it's troubling. And the reaction was almost immediate.
The media is out there, and there is this narrative out there that the train has left the station on this issue, and that folks like yourselves, for conservative Christians, you're living back in the 50s and the 60s, get with the program. What's the response to that? Because that is a narrative that being fueled by a mainstream media out there.
Well, it's really not tied to any kind of biblical anchor, meaning we have right and privilege from the Word of God to say, not on our watch. They will not redefine a basic foundational institution. I think you're going to see a new black and brown coalition be a part of a greater evangelical movement to shift things in America.
The conservative evangelicals talk a lot about the poll numbers on the pro-life issue, about how young evangelicals are very much more pro-life than even maybe their parents were. But on this other issue, it seems to be, or at least the polling shows that.
But even if you look at the data out of North Carolina, if only those under the age of 45 had voted, the amendment there still would have passed by 8 percentage points. When you go down to 30, it was just a 30 and under. It only lost by a couple of points. So it's not as large of a gap as people have indicated. And what happens, quite frankly, and we've seen this for years, is that when someone marries and has children, all of a sudden they start looking at the world a little bit differently. Two major things that change the political and ideological orientation of people, generally speaking. They buy a house, they become more conservative. That's why home ownership is so important. They get married and they have children, all of a sudden they have a much more conservative cultural orientation, because guess what? They're now responsible for another human life and how that young child is trained and taught. And they become much more sensitive to what appears on TV, much more sensitive to what's taught in schools. So I'm not of the opinion that we've lost the millennial generation and they're not going to come around to seeing what natural law has described for us.
And Mitt Romney wants to make everything about the economy. Nothing wrong with that necessarily. I mean, politically it makes sense. But is he missing an opportunity on this issue if he doesn't do something about it here?
Well, I have to say that, in the days following, when he had his first opportunity at Liberty University, he was very clear that he saw marriage as the union of one man and one woman, and that was essential. He talked about the threats on religious freedom. So he's not avoiding the issue. In fact, this week, I think he was in the inner city, I think may have been in Philadelphia, and he brought up that the best way out of poverty is to have a mom and a dad, and raising kids in that environment. And so he clearly understands that message, and I believe he's starting to articulate it more.
If we go with a black-brown coalition, meaning he steps up, there are targeted messages in these communities, it becomes a part of what Mitt Romney believes, he can do well. But even if we can't count on Romney, senatorially, congressionally, we've got to have people who believe in marriage in office.
Gentlemen, Bishop Jackson, Tony Perkins, the Thelma and Louise of the pro-family movement. I've decided to call you that.
That's all right.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Or the salt and pepper.
That is the pro-family duo of Tony Perkins and Bishop Jackson. All right, before we head to break, let's find out what Cicely the Avatar has been up to in this week's social media cafe. Cicely.
Mitt Romney is beginning to look a lot like Joe Biden. Folks start getting a little nervous about whether he's going to slip up and say something that'll get him in trouble.
$10,000? I like being able to fire people who provide services to me. I served in government, but I didn't inhale. I'm not willing to light my hair on fire to try and get support.
But the list of Romney flubs took on a new dimension recently. Now it seems even Romney can't keep track of everything he says.
I'm not familiar precisely with exactly what I said, but I stand by what I said, whatever it was.
Of course, Democrats are having a field day, but Obama has had his share of faux pas, too. Remember this one?
This is my last election, please. Yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility.
Now, of course, Obama thought the mics were off, something that we here at the Brody File are always aware of. Can you, pass me my Starbucks drink? Oh, what did they put in this coffee?
Hey, Cicely, your mic's on.
Oh, sorry. Let us know what you think about Romney. How excited are you about the likely GOP nominee? Comment on Facebook or on Twitter using the hashtag #Who'sForMitt.
When we come back, inside the numbers, where do younger evangelicals and those millennials stand on same-sex marriage? Some answers when we come back.